Next in the Halo Master Chief Collection is Halo 2, the Anniversary Edition. The reason it's called an Anniversary Edition is because, presumably, as Halo 2 was embracing its anniversary, game studios decided to update Halo 2. Give us the exact same game, but with a fresh coat of paint, as it were. So they remastered the game with updated visuals and downright gorgeous cinematic cutscenes. I mean, look at this! Look at this! This is film quality. It's so astonishing. It's astonishing. They could have made an anniversary edition for any of the Halo games. They could have picked Halo 3, which is considered the critically acclaimed game in the franchise. I guess Halo 2 was reaching an anniversary, so they just had to make an anniversary version for that game. And let me tell you, this is one of the greatest remasters I've encountered. And the best part is, just like Halo Combat Evolved, that subtitle's still stupid, you can press the tab key to switch between old school and new school graphics, even during the middle of cutscenes. It's not only fantastic to see the comparison to what the game used to look like compared to the updated version, but also gives players the option on whether or not they prefer to be nostalgic or prefer things to be updated. It's the best of both worlds. I could gush about the quality of the cinematics all day, but I don't have enough time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that! On with Halo 2. This game is set right after the events of Halo, with Master Chief teaming up with Cortana, having destroyed one of the Halo devices, and being celebrated as a hero for humanity for his efforts. Meanwhile, with the Covenant, however, things are not looking good for one elite named Val Vedomy, if I've pronounced that name correctly. He wasn't seen in the last game, as he reports failing his mission in securing the Halo device and stopping the Master Chief, whom the Covenant refers to as a demon. One of the greatest strengths of this game is its narrative. The first Halo game was mysterious, and simple enough for people to get into the basics of what the series is all about: humans versus aliens. Halo 2 is all about expanding the lore. We get to see brief glimpses of life outside of the war for both humans and Covenant. Through the other new main character, Val Vedomy, we get more insight into the politics and religion of the Covenant. And for the sake of potential newbies to the franchise, I might as well explain a bit of lore here. In the lore of Halo, there are these godlike aliens known as Forerunners. At one point in their history, the parasite known as the Flood almost consumed everything. To get rid of the Flood, the Forerunners created 7 Halo devices and activated them in order to wipe out all life, and in doing so, starve out the Flood. Fortunately, the Forerunners were resourceful enough to grow embryos of every living creature and set them off on different planets so that life can start all over again for them to repopulate and to culturalize. This can lead to many a speculation on various beliefs and mythologies in our culture. But to make a long story short, the Covenant worship the Forerunners as gods, obviously placing their sense of spirituality in the wrong people. And they believe that by activating the Halos, they will achieve godhood by entering a spiritual afterlife they refer to as the Great Journey. So essentially, when one of their Halos was blown up by the Master Chief in the previous game, they accused Val Vedomy of heresy for failing his mission. And with this heresy, Val Vedomy is scorned and condemned. He's publicly stripped off and humiliated of his position, and he's tortured by a brute named Tartarus, a reference to the Greek character of the same name. In the opening cinematics of this game alone, we have very interesting parallels between Master Chief and Val Vedomy, as if to indicate that the two of them have some kind of interlinked significance in the grander narrative. Whilst one is being praised for his efforts, the other is being scorned. Whilst we see the compassion of humans, we also get to see the harsh environment of the Covenant. and in later cutscenes just how willing these so-called prophets are willing to manipulate their own followers. It doesn't take long for Master Chief to be called into action when the Covenant somehow find and locate Earth, yet with a smaller number than that invaded Reach. And getting started with the gameplay, it's not too far off from the previous Halo game, except it has a few new additions. To my knowledge, I think turrets are introduced in this game. Some new vehicles like the beloved Scorpion tank are introduced. And exclusive to this game, and in Halo 3, the player has the option to pick up 2 smaller weapons and dual wield them, leading not only to a great sense of badassery and unstoppableness, but also, if you're willing, a sense of strategy to potentially shoot one of your guns whilst you're reloading the other, making for some constant fire if you need to. Also, this is a personal nitpick, but in some of the Halo games, they don't explicitly show you any kind of health bar, which personally bothers me. I get that you're supposed to take cover when your shield meter is down, but I would love to have at least some indication as to my current health, which is why I prefer certain gameplay elements in Halo Reach, and even in a clever sense Halo 3 ODST, but I'll get to that later. Master Chief is just as awesome in the presentation here. So awesome, in fact, there is an entire cutscene dedicated to him finding a Covenant bomb which Cortana disarms, launching himself into outer space with the bomb, flying towards an enemy Covenant ship, activating the bomb, launching himself away as the Covenant ship blows up, and landing perfectly back on one of the human ships. And to top it all off, before he does all that, Cortana asks if Master Chief will miss, to which he responds, "I won't." Sorry, that scene is just too awesome to not mention. You fight in some human environments, and later you find yourself fighting in another Halo ring. And some new weapons are introduced in the gameplay. My personal favorite being the Energy Sword. Call it a lightsaber knockoff if you will, but the design of the sword is so intriguing, and its function so investing. I can't help but love it. I would imagine you have to be very careful when activating it. I don't think this is something you can just casually turn on at the side of your pocket or something. And in an interesting twist, almost half of the campaign has the player take the role of Val Vadamy, whom, by his condition, has been forced to assume the position of an elite martyr, over having a somewhat shameful yet still honorable history, known as the Arbiter. And Val is referred to as the Arbiter for the rest of the franchise. As the Arbiter, you initially take on various missions with some alien allies, sent by the Prophet to hunt down a so-called heretic. Some elements of the gameplay will have to be getting used to, I must admit. The alien hand in front of you should be enough to catch you off guard as it is. An admittedly jarring element of the gameplay is trying to find out who's your friend and who's your ally. You've been spending so long fighting these aliens that it can be quite tricky discerning friend from foe. Seriously though, if friendly fire wasn't handled well, I would have been accidentally killing my team half the time. Fortunately, the game is generous enough for you to have a cursor that glows green when you're looking at an ally and glows red when you're staring at an enemy to be taken down. Both the Master Chief and the Arbiter function in the same way in terms of gameplay, yet the both of them have at least one ability unique to them. The Master Chief has a torch, which is useful for particularly dark areas, and the Arbiter has the ability to turn invisible for a brief period of time. Think of it like a knockoff of the Spy from Team Fortress 2. And whilst this game isn't entirely built around stealth, you can use turning invisible as a great strategy for outmaneuvering your enemies. Or if you just want to skip entire chunks of the level without having to face much opposition, invisibility is usually the best response. Also, this game has boss fights. Not many of the other Halo games would try to attempt using boss fights because, quite frankly, this series is not really the best at delivering satisfying boss fights. Oh, don't get me wrong. The first boss fight with the Arbiter certainly keeps you on your toes if you're not prepared. as the heretic you encounter will overwhelm you with his duplicates, in which the strategy is to wait until your invisibility meter is up, so that you can take shelter somewhere and try to snipe out the real heretic from afar. But apart from that engaging tactic, that boss fight is over pretty quickly. The same can be said for the Prophet of Regret and later on Tartarus. Whilst the Prophet of Regret can certainly teleport and shoot beams of yellow light at you, it can be rather anticlimactic knowing that all you have to do is hop on the vehicle and just simply punch the Prophet, hoping that you're not going to get overwhelmed by people who will shoot you. And Tartarus was especially disappointing. Despite his strength in beating you with one blow, if you're not careful, his boss fight is over as quickly as it starts. So yeah, the boss fights are very anticlimactic. As well as the ending for that matter, let's get the elephant out of the room. As amazing as the build-up is in terms of the narrative, the game ends rather anticlimactically, before a segment of what many players would have assumed would be the last level. As cool as Master Chief's line of finishing this fight is, there's an entire missing chapter here between Halo 2 and Halo 3. To my knowledge, there's this graphic novel, which is meant to tell the events between Halo 2 and Halo 3. I wouldn't mind graphic novel adaptations, but this presentation is quite jarring as far as the games are concerned. So by the time Halo 3 starts, assuming you're just playing through these games simultaneously, you're left to question, well, what happened to Chief? Did he fall off the ship? Did he find a way to explode it, but ended up shooting off like a shooting star in the process? I think those are my only real complaints about the game, the anticlimaxes that it can bring. But everything else about them, the build-up, the gameplay, and certain revelations about the lore were fantastic. And some of the new characters were equally fantastic. You have the daughter of a crucial character from the previous game, avenging her father. And I think it's safe to say the Arbiter is the most satisfying new character in this game. I know some people are quite divisive on him, but I found his character growth and narrative within this story to be quite engaging. The Arbiter has a story with intriguing themes, like honor, truth, betrayal, and an intriguing critique on the corruption of religious power. Similar to Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, clear that these prophets do not want to be questioned. And take it from a guy who studied philosophy in his spare time, if a leader of a certain ideology hesitates to be challenged and engage with questions, you really should be concerned. All that, plus the fact that the Arbiter is voiced by the awesome Keith David, who has a voice that can rival in awesomeness with the Master Chief. My voice is more epic.
You love to hear yourself talk, demon. But I shall dominate the voice acting competition.
Tell that to the Covenant.
I believe my voice will be the more honorable, demon.
Speaking of Master Chief and Arbiter, they have an epic meetup with a villainous character who has a drastic transformation compared to the original game. The Gravemind is the grand intelligence of the Flood Parasite, who looks like a depressed whale made entirely of Shrek's earwax, bogies, and poo. At least in the original game. In the Anniversary Edition, yikes! Look at that! Now that's a Gravemind! That looks like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things on steroids! So, overall, thoughts on the game? I personally think it was a massive improvement over the original. I know a lot of people are divisive on the campaign, and I can definitely see why. There were so many anticlimactic moments, yet the build-up in the narrative was so amazing. It managed to expand the lore in the right ways, there were enough new elements in the gameplay for players to be engaged, and thematically speaking, this may be the strongest campaign. But this classic trilogy would come to a conclusion with the next installment.